This morning, we're going to share one of the greatest stories that Jesus ever told. And if you've heard this story before, my prayer is that the Spirit of God would just come and you would encounter and experience this story afresh and anew, that this would be an encounter between you and God. So we find ourselves the beginning of our story in Luke chapter 15 and verse 11. Luke 15, verse 11, Jesus continued, there was a man who had two sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. One of the things that is going to help us understand this parable, maybe in ways that we haven't before, is to understand Middle Eastern village culture that Jesus was living in and he was speaking to, because there's nuances here that we wouldn't get if we didn't know that. Kenneth Bailey was the founder, he's recently gone home to be with the Lord, of the Middle Eastern and New Testament study, studied at Jerusalem, and he has a lot of insight, and we're going to be using that, so thank God for his ministry. So anyways, as 21st century Americans, you read this, there's a man had two sons, younger one said to his father, "Give me my share of the estate." You might think that what's going on here is that this younger son, he's tired of living in the little village. He wants to go out and see the big city. He wants to see the world. "Dad, give me some spending money." Not what's going on here. Jesus' first hearers would have been shocked. They would have understood exactly what the younger one was saying. "Dad, I'm tired of waiting for you to die. I know that when you croak, I get the inheritance. And every morning I wake up and I'm kind of hoping that I'll hear a commotion around the house and I'll say, 'What happened?' Says, 'Well, the old man finally kicked the bucket.' Wow. And I'll put a sad face on, but I'll just be waiting. When can we divvy it up?" Wow. Totally shocked, totally shocked. This was an honor-shame culture that they lived in. And for a son to say something like this to his father, that hurt any dad, wouldn't it? But totally shocking then. You know, one of the most hurtful things that a person can ever go through, and maybe you've experienced this, is to find out a relationship wasn't what you thought it was. I know of people, friends of mine, who have sat in courtrooms for custody hearings, and their kid takes the stand and says stuff about them, and they think, "What? I thought You're my kid and you're saying this in front of all these people?" Now, we know sometimes they're put up to it, but still, it hurts, doesn't it? We probably all know people. I can think of friends that I know that during the pandemic, you know, whether you wore a mask or didn't wear a mask, to get the vaccine, didn't get the vaccine, people said, "You're not my friend anymore." And they think, we've been friends for 40 years and now this is it, you know? We have a difference and now this is over. Marriages that have happened that way. You're doing what? It's one of the most hurtful things that a person can ever go through. That's what this dad was feeling. "You what? You want the inheritance now? You're my boy. I'm your dad. I thought, we worked together. We lived together. I thought this was..." And the whole time you were just holding out for the money? Now, Jesus' hearers are expecting the father to do what a traditional Middle Eastern father in village culture would do. This is what he was expected to do. It was to slap his son as hard as he could across the face and "Get out of my home." Wow. That's what they're thinking he's going to do. But he doesn't do it. Notice what he says. So he divided his property between them. He said, "You want your inheritance now before I die? You can have it, this afternoon I'll sign the papers, you can sign the papers, and your share will be yours." It's totally shocking for the hearers. What he's doing, what? He gives it to him. And we know it was a sizable inheritance for a village family, because later in the story we find out they had goats and they could slaughter the fattened calf to feed a whole village, and they had professional musicians and dancers that came to the party. This was a family that had some stuff. And the father gives him his share. This is the next thing that happens. Luke 15:13. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there he squandered his wealth in expensive living. This phrase, got together all he had, it's an expression, means he turned it all into cash. So here is this land and property that his family had scrimped and saved and worked, getting up before the crack of dawn for generations so that the family would have something to pass on to the next generation. For years and years, they'd make sacrifice and worked hard, and he just turns it all into cash. We've seen stuff like this happen in our world, haven't we? Here's the family business, and it's done well for 2 or 3 generations, and then comes along somebody, and they just, it's gone. So this is what he's turning it on to cash. And as soon as he gets it into cash, he heads right out of town, following the road to a distant country. Why does he do that? Because he knows what he's done. He's brought great dishonor on his father. And this is an honor-shame culture. The number one thing you want is honor. And he just dishonored his dad in the greatest way he could have. And so he knows they're going to start talking about him as soon as they find out. Anybody ever grew up in a small town? They talk, don't they? Some of you were one of them. No, we won't say, well, God forgave you, right? Can you hear him talking? You know what happened yesterday? The younger son of so-and-so, what he asked for? That good-for-nothing little brat. I always had a feeling about him. I tell you what I'd do if it was my son. I would have slapped him and I would say, get out of here. There's probably a lot of words they said we're not supposed to say in church, all right? They would start talking, so he says, I got to get out of here where nobody knows me. And so that's what he did. He turned it all into cash. And this is what he does with the inheritance. He spends it on expensive living. Jesus just doesn't tell us exactly what it was. His older son is later going to accuse him. He's wasted it on prostitutes. But the older brother wasn't with him. We don't know what he did. It was just expensive living. It could have been what we would say immoral things, but living in an honor-shame culture, probably what he did, and Kenneth Bailey says this, he used it to get honor for himself in this other culture. How you would do this with inheritances, you would play the role of a high roller. You know what I'm talking about, a high roller? He'd come into town and he'd say, get something to eat, and he'd leave a huge tip, and, I'm just a nice guy. He just totally dishonored his dad. His dad's living with that back home, and he's getting honor for himself here. He's the type of guy that at the bar would say, another round of drinks all on me. Yeah. He's the guy that would have bought the luxury suite at the Reds and invited all these people he doesn't know just so they would say, who paid for all this? And it's that guy there. And so he was buying honor for himself is probably what he was doing. Look what happens next. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed his pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. So here he is. He just keeps spending and spending and spending until he's totally out. He doesn't have a cent left. And then a famine happens. And even today in that part of the world, a famine is serious business. I mean, during the pandemic, how many say you tried to get soup or something, you couldn't get it, their shelves were bare, but we had food to eat, right? We made it. Famine, this is a different story. There was actually a famine in 2011 in Somalia, not far from here, from where the story is. They didn't get their annual rains that they depend on every year. The next year in 2011, 285,000 people died. Famines can be serious. And so now here he is, and he's out of money in a distant country where he doesn't have any real friends, just people that bummed off of him, liked him while he was spending. And now there's a famine, and he's in trouble. Why doesn't he just walk back and go home? This is why. Villages in that day had something they called the Gesatsa ceremony. And what would happen if someone who had dishonored his father and shamed his father and the village, like this younger son, ever dared to walk back to the village? This is what they would do. They see him walking down the road, and they would get an earthenware jar, and they'd fill it with burnt nuts and burnt corn. There was symbolism there. And when he walked in, they would take it and they would shatter it in front of him. And then they would say at the top of their lungs, "We disown you." You ever heard of Amish shunnings? They're like medium compared. This is a total ban. They would all treat him as if he was dead and didn't exist. Total disownment by the whole village. Can you imagine if you've grown up in a community and you wake up one day and every person you know, the teachers you had in school, the neighbors you had, the friends that you had, everybody looks at you as if you don't exist. They totally give you the cold shoulder as if you're dead, and all you see is this cold, hard stare of hatred. That's hard. He knew, if I ever dare to go back home, that's what's facing me. So he stays. And he hires himself out to a citizen of that country. That was the most desperate form of employment you could have in that culture. This is how it worked. If you are so desperate, you would go to somebody and say, I will hire myself out to you. I will work for you for an indefinite period of time. And if you think I'm worth paying, then you get to pay me. But if you don't, I get nothing. Nobody did that unless they were desperate. They're starving. Because you could risk working a week, a month, 2 months, and at the end of it, the guy says, "You're not worth it." And you get nothing. So that's what he does. He's hired himself out to this guy. And look, no one gave him anything. The guy still hasn't paid him 1 penny yet. He's getting desperate. He runs out of money. He reminds me of William Post. William Post in 1988 played the Pennsylvania lottery, and he won $16.2 million. He was broke in 3 months. He's hired himself out. And so he's feeding pigs. For us, working on a pig farm is just a job like any others. But for a Jewish boy, that was the worst form of employment you could possibly have. So I had this guy, Abdullah. I became friends with him at seminary. And he was from Iraq. He was a national from Iraq and had gotten saved 15 years before, had been a Muslim, and he had come to Christ, and just an awesome story. And one day I was talking to him about what he could eat. I says, "Well, now that you're a follower of Jesus and not a Muslim, you can eat pork." I says, "What do you think about pork?" He said, "I've never tried it." I said, "What? You've never, ever had it before?" He said, "Greg," he says, "I know I'm allowed to. The Bible says I can because I'm a Christian." He's like, but over there, pigs are like rats to us. He says, "That's like me eating rats." And I just stood there dumbfounded. I says, "Abdullah, you are missing out, buddy. What's wrong with you?" I just wanted to take him down to the Waffle House and get bacon. It reminds you, Benjamin Franklin, one of our founding fathers, says bacon is proof that God loves us and wants us to be happy. That's an American. I couldn't get him to eat it. It's just the same mentality. This younger son, he's working on a pig farm. You can't get, farther than the bottom of the barrel than this. And so there he is. Talking about pigs, just to break it up here. What happens when you play tug of war with a pig? It's pulled pork. What do you call a pig who does karate? Pork chop. What do you call a laundromat for pigs? Hogwash. So here he is. He's working on this pig farm, and he's starving. And he looks, and he sees this pig slop, and it starts to look appetizing to him. It reminds me of Mitch Felderhoff. He's the president of Munster Milling Company in Munster, Texas. It's a dog food company. And he said, "We never put anything in our dog food that wouldn't be good for you to eat. That's how we treat your dog." So for 30 days, Mitch went eating nothing but dog food. He has a wife and 2 young sons, and he does a lot of the cooking. He says, "I still kept cooking." He said, "I cooked chicken or pork or waffles for the whole family, for my wife and the 2 boys. And then I'd sit down there with my bowl of dog food. We'd have dinner together." 30 days. He said, "You know what? I did lose 30 pounds in 30 days. He said, but I feel fantastic. You should get this, So that's what he did. His coworkers said that his coat looked shinier than ever, and they even noticed hair growing on his knuckles. He said he broke the dog food program with brisket nachos, and he was feeling good. Okay. You ever looked at the dog food and said, that looks great? I don't think so. This is the younger son. He's looking, and it's starting to look good to him. This is what happens. Luke 15:17, when he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So he got up and went to his father. You see him standing there? He says, if I keep working for this pig farmer, staring at this pig slop, I'm going to die, and they're going to throw my body in an unmarked grave, and that's going to be the end of me. Or I can go back home, and I can face the Gesetze ceremony. And when it's over, maybe I can get to my dad and say, you can completely disown me as your son, never call me your son again, never have that place in your heart again. But just let me be a servant. I do know how the operation works. And you can pay me really cheap. I just need a place to sleep and food to eat. Maybe he'll let me. It's my only hope. That's his plan, and he's working it. And he's playing it through in his mind. He knows that when he enters the village, the first thing that's going to happen is the little kids that just run the village wild. They're going to see him coming, clothes all tattered, smelling like pig poop. They're going to know what he did, and they're going to start heckling him. There he is! They're going to say all kind of nasty stuff. And as soon as they start making a commotion, then the adults and the women are going to look, and the men are going to give the stare like, you're not a man after you did that to your dad. And then they're going to start moving around. He knows what's going to happen. They're going to get the jar. They're going to throw it down. They're going to say, I disown. And he's playing it out in his mind. This is what's going to happen. But maybe if I can get to my dad, drop onto my knees, he'll let me be a hired servant. So he's working his plan. But the father's already working a plan too. Because as all of this has been going on, people have noticed something different about him. He's always looking up. He's always outside working, and he always keeps looking up. Looking up. But it's like a nervous habit. He always keeps looking up. He hasn't been the same since the boy left. And they don't know it, but he has a plan too. So this is what happens. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The father knows how it's all going to play out. If he's not careful, the kids are going to see him first, and then the son will have to go through the shame of the Gesetze ceremony. So he's looking. He's always scanning the horizon. When's my son going to come home? When's he going to come home? When is he that? And he sees somebody, that's not the way my son walks. Is he there? Is he there? Is he there? And the day finally comes, he goes, that's him. Nobody walks like him. And before anybody else can get to him, he does what to us seems normal. He runs, But this is totally out of character and culture. In that day, dignified men like him, from the time they become a man, you wear a long robe and you never show your legs. No shorts, just a long robe. And you always walk slow and dignified like this. You don't run anymore. You don't even walk fast because you're a dignified patriarch. They all do this. So what the father does is before anybody can get to the son, he does what's totally countercultural. He lifts up his robe so they can see his legs, and he starts running. And now nobody sees the younger son. All eyes are on the father. What is going on? We've never seen a man run like this, act like this. And so he takes all of the shame that was going to be poured out on the son, and now all eyes are on the father. And he takes his arms and he puts them around the son, pig poop and all. He doesn't care. And he hugs his son. He gets to him before they can. Isn't that awesome? That was the plan that he was working. And then notice what happens. The son starts reciting his speech. The son said to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. And the father doesn't even respond. He just cuts him off. But the father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. So those were ways that you signified a son in that day. Not everybody could have sandals. Only sons did. He said, put the sandals of a son back on him. And only those in the family could wear a ring. And he said, put the ring back on him. Get these, I love him, but get these clothes off of him. Get a nice robe on him. And he fully reinstates him as his son. Isn't that awesome? And bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and he is found. So they began to celebrate. Jesus said this parable so real that we almost can think that this was a real father and a real son. But it is a parable. It's a parable. Who's the father? It's the God of the universe. The God of the universe. That he sees the lost. And no matter what they've done, no matter what we've done, we've all been lost. And one time in our lives, he saw us coming. And no matter what we had done, no matter who we had hurt or who we had let down, no matter what sin we had engaged in, he didn't care, no matter what we smelled like, so to speak. He came running for us and embraced us and wrapped his arms around us. This is who the God of the universe is. And Jesus, of all people, knows this. John chapter 1 and verse 18 says, no one has ever seen God, but the one and only Son, who is himself God, who is at the Father's side, has made him known. So here's Jesus, the one who fully knows the Father, and he shared this parable so that you would know exactly what his Father is like. So the worship team is going to come, and they're going to lead us into